T, good to see how you doing. How you been? You're the first one in T today. Pablo, good to see you. How you doing? How's things? I'm just pinning the live quick. Okay, it's pinned. Hi, Miles. Carlos, good to see you. How you doing? Beat Pablo again. You definitely did. You're the first one in today. Morning, Miles and CMF. Shelly, good to see you all morning. How you doing? How's things? Okay, let's do intro, disclaimer, what we're going to talk about tonight's live, and by that time, everyone should be tuned in for the first part of the live. Welcome to the CMF Live. If you're watching this for the first time ever, the CMF stands for Crypto Mouse Family. My name is Miles. You can tune to this live Monday to Friday, 10 p.m. long time onwards for the most recent news regarding cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, AI, politics, and regulations. Pretty much all the information you should know about regarding the world completely transforming into a digital space. The disclaimer of this live show, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. This is episode 429 of the CMF Live show. If you're watching this for the first time ever, it's great that we're on episode 429. And also, thank you so much to everybody who has already straight away liked the live show and retweet the live show if you're watching this on X. And if you're watching this on YouTube, thanks so much to everyone who's also liked the live. And a special thank you to everybody who's put a comment outside the live on X and on YouTube. Now, on tonight's live, we're going to be talking about essentially the court. We were expecting something to come out of the Supreme Court regarding the tariff policies. We're going to be talking about that on tonight's live. We're also going to be going through some perspective news from BitGet's CEO in terms of essentially where the market's going to be headed towards. We're going to talk about the United Kingdom in terms of essentially the Financial Conduct Authority and how they see essentially, fit going forward inside the crypto space. We're also going to be talking about Wall Street on tonight's live as well. We're going to go through news on tonight's live regarding essentially crypto delegations, the golden age, essentially another perspective, essentially covering on tonight's live. We're also going to talk about some other factors that are in play in terms of the Republican Party, Democratic Party, and the crypto regulations, most importantly, and also Ripple news as well, which is mostly towards the end of the live. Now, before we go through the first news, which is regarding essentially the court decision, let's go inside the comment section first, and then we go straight into the essentially first news on tonight's live. Let's see where we were at inside the comment section. We were here. Evening, Miles and CMF. Manny, good to see you. How you doing? Good evening, Professor Miles and the rest of the team. Good to see you all, Funky. How you doing? Evening, Miles and CMF. Joe, good to see you all. How you doing? Evening, Miles and hello, Miles and CMF. Comatose, good to see you all. How you doing? Miles, I thought today was a big day for XRP. No price change for XRP today. You assumed because of the BNY Mellon announcement or the Ripple essentially announcement of the FCA. Not much is going to be happening until action is taken, but it is, genuinely good news, extremely bullish, which we're going to cover on tonight's live as well. Thinking of buying more HBAR, essentially 11 cents. You think it's still a good price to buy more HBAR? I think HBAR is incredibly cheap for what it's going to become. This is not financial advice for anybody to go buy it outright. You should always buy anything. You should never buy anything that you don't understand. If you understand it, then it's your money, it's your choice. So it's not financial advice whatsoever. But I personally think it's incredibly cheap for essentially what I presume is what it's going to become. January 9th, supposed to be a big day for Ripple. Wow. In terms of what actually came out. So we're going to cover that on tonight's live as well a little bit later on. Now, the first news on tonight's live was essentially regarding essentially the court decision of the tariff policies. So the Supreme Court, or should I just say the Democratic Party, were hoping that the Supreme Court comes out today and goes against Donald Trump's tariff policies. And it was going to be a big announcement that could have drastic essentially movements inside the crypto market, stock market, or the world economy in general, because Trump did tariff every country, as they should do essentially, because every country was tariffing the United States for the longest time. Now, unfortunately for the Democratic Party, they didn't get the results they wanted. For everybody else, we won by the looks of it, because the Supreme Court didn't even come out with a judgment. So here it is. A Trump decision that will essentially impact Bitcoin and altcoins was expected today from the US. The latest essential situation has been revealed. So here it is. The US Supreme Court did not issue a ruling today in a critical case testing the legalities of the comprehensive, essentially, tariffs President Donald Trump essentially has imposed globally. The court issued a ruling on only one criminal case today. The Supreme Court did not announce any advances which cases will be decided. The case is essentially seen as a crucial turning point, testing the limits of Trump's broad claims to power, which essentially he claims to assault by January 2025 upon his return to office, and the extent to which essentially the Supreme Court is willing to block them. The outcome of this case has essentially the potential to impact not only the US domestic laws, but also the global economy. But the court didn't even rule it out today. During a hearing, essentially on November 5th, both conservative and essentially liberal judges reportedly expressed doubts about the legal basis for the tariffs Donald Trump essentially issued. The Trump administration is essentially appealing to the lower courts also, and in terms of the rulings that were supposed to be determined today, but no announcements. Trump, however, argues that tariffs strengthen the US financially, which they have. In a social media post, essentially, the president said the Supreme Court ruling against the tariffs would be a terrible blow to the United States. Trump implemented what he called essentially the reciprocal tariffs on goods imported from nearly all trading partners under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA, declaring essentially trade deficits a national emergency. The same law was used to justify tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico, cutting illegal drug trafficking as essentially the national emergency. The cases before the Supreme Court were filed by companies affected by the tariffs and by essentially 12 US states, most of which governed by Democrats. No timeline for the decision has yet to be announced. So, the Democratic Party was essentially hoping today would be the day to shame Donald Trump. Unfortunately, things didn't really work out for them. But it did work out for the rest of us, I'll be very honest, because if we did get some sort of ruling from the Supreme Court that they were going to be going after Donald Trump in terms of the tariffs, it would have caused a drastic, catastrophic market failure in crypto, essentially in the stock market and so on. It could have went the other way as well, but it's good that we didn't get any sort of rulings, to be fairly honest. So it was an amazing day for every other human being, not so much for the Democratic Party, but who cares about the Democratic Party? Now, BitGet CEO is who we're essentially going to be talking about next on tonight's live. BitGet CEO essentially has outlined 5 key crypto predictions for 2026. Gracie essentially Chen, CEO of BitGet Exchange, announced 5 pivotal cryptocurrency predictions for 2026, and for essentially via X, forcing integration with traditional finance and emphasizing regulatory compliance. Her main bullet points were essentially that rules and regulations this year is going to be good for the market space. We go from a speculative gray area market space or Wild West market space to a traditional mature market space and intertwined with the financial sector. Chen's forecast signals a shift from speculative trade essentially towards regulated structural growth, influencing institutional strategies and market options globally this year. Gracie Chen, CEO of BitGet, posted essentially comprehensive predictions on this matter. The predictions emphasize increased global trading, stablecoin utility, and regulatory compliance. This approach aims to transition from speculative markets to more structured essentially more structured growth within the industry. Market responses include supporting remarks from industry essentially leaders like Joseph, who essentially identifies stablecoins as financial infrastructure. This also aligns with shifts towards more regulated environments and integrates traditional financial elements into the crypto ecosystems. Research teams essentially notes that Gracie Chen's predictions could lead to increased institutional adoption of stablecoins. The team's analysis indicates that the emergence of stablecoins and compliant exchanges as essential to global liquidity infrastructures and transforming the traditional and crypto markets alike. In the most simplest way, she presumes 2026 is going to be about regulations and moving away from retail to institutional money and so on, which is exactly what we all presumed 2026 was going to be about. But it's nice to see crypto CEOs coming forward and essentially, reaffirming everything once again. Now, the United Kingdom is what we're going to be talking about next on tonight's live. But before we talk about the United Kingdom, let's go to the comment section first. Let's see what's happening there, and then we'll go straight into the next news. As previously, this is live, which means if you do have any questions, go for inside the comment section. Let's see where we were at. Hello, Miles at CMF. Scott, good to see you as well. How you doing? Share the live. Let's go, Scott. Good evening, Miles. How you doing? I'm doing great, Callie. Good to see you as well. How you doing? Hello, Miles at CMF. Let's go, Scott. Evening, Miles at CMF. Jason, good to see you as well. How you doing? The UK had a positive impact on XRP today. Please explain, Miles. I will a little bit later on tonight's live. Hi, everyone. Hi, Miles. Let's go for Facts News. Let's go, Carl. Good to see you as well. Hi, Miles at CMF. Stormy, good to see you as well. How you doing? Let's go, Scott. Share the live. Let's go, Scott. Now, the United Kingdom has been moving at a snail's pace when it comes to crypto regulations. Their original dates to enter the crypto markets were going to be 27 or 28, in other words, 2027 or 2028. But it seems like they're going to be fast-tracking it this year. It's not fast enough still, but it's better than what their original targets were. The UK crypto licensing essentially gateway to open September 2026. The Financial Conduct Authority confirms it. The UK's financial regulator has outlined a clear timeline for bringing crypto firms into the full licensing regime, setting September 2026 as the opening of a formal application gateway. The move marks a decisive step towards replacing intermediary registrations with a comprehensive authorization framework. The Financial Conduct Authority said the application period will be open in September 2026 and remain available for a limited window for at least 28 days. Firms seeking to operate under the new regime will need to submit applications during the period to be considered for authorization. The Financial Conduct Authority confirmed that the new crypto asset regime will formally go live on October 25, 2027. From that date, only firms authorized under the Financial Services and Markets Act will be permitted to provide regulated crypto services in the United Kingdom. Crucially, existing registrations will not rule over. Firms currently registered under the money laundering regulations or operating under essentially any sort of payment service permissions will be required to reapply. There will be no automatic transitions into the new framework regardless of prior essentially approval status. Firms that submit applications during September 2026 window will be allowed to continue operating under essentially a saving provision while their applications are reviewed. The FCA expects decisions on these applications to be essentially be made before the October 2027 start date. A different set of rules will apply to firms that miss the application window or fail to secure authorization in time. Those businesses will fall into a transitional regime that limits activity to servicing existing contracts only. Under the arrangements, firms will be barred from offering new products or onboarding new customers. The distinction places essentially significant weight on September 2026 deadline, as missing it would essentially materially restrict future business operations in the UK market. The FCA essentially has made it clear that the new regime will closely mirror standards applied across traditional financial services. Authorized crypto firms will be subject to essential requirements and conduct rules and safeguarding obligations and governance expectations. The regulator essentially framed the shift as a part of a broader effort to bring crypto asset activity into the UK's established financial framework. For more firms essentially planning to operate in the country, long-term, the message is straightforward. Full authorization will be mandatory and preparation ahead of the 2026 gateway will be essential. In other words, the UK is just following the exact same footsteps essentially the EU has left behind in terms of the MICA regulations. For the crypto space, you would have to apply for some sort of a licensing to be able to operate in the United Kingdom. The previous licenses everybody held inside the United Kingdom does not matter anymore, and everybody has to reapply for these new sets of rules. Now, there's a time limit, 28-day essentially window for every firm to apply to get some sort of UK licensing. Look, in a sense, it's good that the UK is finally starting to move. As I said for the longest time, Washington, D.C. is the capital of politics, City of London is the capital of money, and essentially the Vatican is the capital of religion. So it's good that the UK is finally taking footsteps ahead. Now, moving on from the United Kingdom essentially to Wall Street. Now, we are going to be coming back to the FCA in the UK a little bit later on tonight's live regarding Ripple. But for now, we're going to move on to Wall Street. So, Wall Street banks head towards $157 billion in profit as trading stays hot. Wall Street's biggest banks players are essentially heading towards $157 billion in annual profit, the second largest total essentially the industry has ever seen. The numbers land as Donald Trump now is the 47th president of the United States and continues his second term with a sharp policy shift that kept markets active all year. Analysts expect the six largest firms to report profits up 9% from last year when earnings roll out next week based on essentially the estimates gathered in New York. This is all good news. news for the stock market and for crypto. Those 6 firms essentially are JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. The result would be the strongest showing since essentially 2021, when Stanley's cash and deal volume essentially flooded the systems. Stocks of every major bank climbed through most of last year essentially, and carried that strength into January through the cracks showed late essentially in December, when JP Morgan flagged higher costs for 2026 and the shares fell 4.7% in one day. But that didn't matter because they're up in profits. Trump's policy style kept clients active. Each major announcement pushed investors to adjust essentially their positions, which fed straight into the trading revenue. That activity helped the bank sector essentially post a steady fees, even while lending essentially slowed during the first half of the year. Many borrowers waited to see whether the policy landed before committing to new loans. The uncertainty worked both ways. Trading desks also enjoyed strong quarters, but loan growth essentially stayed soft early on. But also, regarding that matter, Gerald, of essentially RBC Capital Markets, said businesses learn how to operate under the noise coming out of Washington. After introducing essentially him once, Cassidy essentially said companies now manage their uncertainty better than before. Deal making finally broke loose in the second half. Advisory teams also landed roles of some of the largest transactions of the year. JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs also advised on the roughly essentially $55 billion essentially buyout of Electronic Arts. Financing essentially followed quickly. Lenders stepped in with large commitments, and JP Morgan wrote some of the biggest checks the year has seen so far. Citigroup also signaled strength. Mark Morrison, essentially the firm's chief financial officer, said in December that his bank expected investment banking fees to rise in the mid 20% range during the first quarter essentially of 2025. Also, analysts now expect 5 of the 6 firms to generate about $9.9 billion in investment banking fees for the quarter, up 12.8% from a year earlier. Jefferies Financial Group offered an early essentially data point. The firm reported a 20% jump in investment banking revenue to essentially $1.19 billion for its fiscal fourth quarter, though that period ended in November and does not essentially line up perfectly with the calendar results. Matt Zimmer of essentially William Blair said activity picked up late in the year. After introducing him once, Matt said essentially supply and demand finally came together as markets reopened. Do you see where essentially this is going? This is going essentially the direction that the Democratic Party hated, that it's making Trump look good. The Democratic Party said Trump is essentially going to be ruining America's economy. The Fed assumed Trump is going to be ruining America's economy, and so many other Democrats came out and said that essentially Trump is not even just the Democratic Party in the U.S. The EU just about 2 days ago came out and said that Trump is going to be ruining the U.S. dollars, ruining the U.S. economy, and that everybody should be going towards the euros. But by the looks of it, America has done pretty damn well under Trump. Market swings are also helped trading desks. The S&P 500 rose about 16% last year, adding the fuel to equity businesses across the banking industry. Remember when they said essentially tariffs will ruin the American economy? Well, it seems like they worked out pretty damn well. Analysts expect trading revenue to rise nearly 13% at JP Morgan and 9.3% at Bank of America. Goldman Sachs is essentially forecast to post a 6.3% increase. Citigroup may see essentially a 2.7% decline due to weaker essentially fixed income results. Morgan Stanley faces a tougher comparison, and stocks trading revenue jumped 51% in the fourth quarter of 2024. Even so, estimates point to the fourth quarter revenue of $5.46 billion, up from essentially $5.26 billion a year earlier. Looking ahead, analysts say guidance matters as much as the current earnings. And Morgan Stanley's analyst, led by essentially Betsy, said confirmation of capital markets rebound will be closely watched. Forecast for 2026 could benefit if interest rates fall. In other words, even the banks want rate cuts now. And yet, Jerome Powell in general just doesn't want to do rate cuts. He wants to be Gary Gensler 2.0, do absolutely nothing until the day he's pushed out the door. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is set to leave in May. Thank God for that, I'll be very honest. And Trump has essentially campaigned for lower rates. Even the bankers want lower rates. TD essentially Cohen analyst Stephen wrote that Trump may choose a more dovish successor. In other words, Trump is going to be choosing a better person, someone that will actually listen to the public, that someone will actually do his job when he's paid to do it. Rate cuts usually let each bank pay less on deposits, lowering fund costing, and balance sheets may also improve as 5-year securities brought in 2021 reached maturity. But do you remember what the Fed released 2 days ago on this live show? I read out essentially an article regarding the Fed. And the Fed wrote an article essentially suggesting that, going ahead in 2026, basically when Jerome Powell is not there, that America's economy is going to tank, inflation is going to go through the roof, and so on. But it doesn't seem like that, because according to the banks, according to Wall Street, not so much. In fact, essentially rates coming down is going to help them. And when it helps the banks, it helps the people that borrow regarding the banks. Cassidy also said the setup looks favorable. After introducing him earlier, Gerald essentially said bonds bought in 2020, 2021 are coming due this year, and the bank sector can now place that money into higher yield assets. So if that is happening right now, essentially, 2026, the banks, the Wall Street guys, everybody wants lower rate cuts. And they're all suggesting we get low rate cuts, we can lower our costs. When we lower our costs, we essentially lower the borrowing costs, which means when people want to borrow against their assets regarding the banks, they pay less fees. But the Fed said we did a survey, and in 2026 and beyond, the American economy is going to collapse. Inflation is going to go through the roof because Trump is in control. But it doesn't seem like that at all. And they say the Fed is an independent department. Sure. The Fed is independent, sure. In my opinion, the Fed's been funded for the longest time by the Democratic Party. Now, before we go through the next news on tonight's live, which is regarding the golden age of crypto, before we go through that, let's go through the comment section first. This was happening there, and I'll go straight into the next news. So let's see where we're at. Mike, thank you so much for the donation. Thank you so much for the $70 donation. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Mike. Honestly. Thank you, brother. XRP are about to... Okay, no, we're here. They know we were here. Hi, Miles and family. Good to see you as well. How you doing, Alex? Miles, what will be the next steps for Venezuela? The next steps for Venezuela would have to be America has to intervene again. So removing essentially the president of Venezuela has caused an uproar in the people that supported him. In other words, the people that were being paid by the leader of Venezuela are now, jobless and no money. So those people in Venezuela have decided to take arms and go against the people and to see who essentially is against the leader of Venezuela and so on and so on. And you can check that out on the news yourselves as well. I'm not going to go too detailed on that because you can't. But in my opinion, the US has to intervene more into Venezuela so that somebody naturally is elected from essentially Venezuelan people, and that every possible route to the leader of Venezuela is gone, in my opinion. Every possible route should be cut off, and that somebody new from the people of Venezuela should be chosen. That's essentially somebody that has zero ties to this treacherous dictator that's right now essentially being held in the US, the leader of Venezuela. So I think the US should intervene a little bit more so that, essentially finish the job, in other words. They did 50% of the job, which was removing a dictator. Now they need to do the other 50% and essentially choose someone that essentially should replace him. Somebody that has zero ties to previous, essentially, dictatorship, in my opinion. And that the US should be, compensated for this as well. They shouldn't be doing it for free in any sort of a way either. Evening, Miles, and happy Friday. Good to see you, Susie. How you doing? XRP and XLM are about to do something special. In my humble opinion, this is not an advice. I am just participating in this decision. Let's go, Scott. Miles, share information and or thoughts of ZBEC network. Thanks. Regarding ZBEC network, long time ago, I essentially purchased ZBEC before anybody even knew what ZBEC was. I sold it along the way because they promised a lot of things and pretty much never delivered. And then somewhere down the line, pretty much last year, ZBEC started picking up again. And in my opinion, it's not a must-have project at all. But if you're holding ZBEC, if anybody out there is holding ZBEC, I hope it does very well for you. Miles, can you share with us your opinion about Greenland versus USA, or also Mexico versus USA? I noticed many countries doesn't want USA's umbrella anymore. What's next? The countries that don't want USA's umbrella are stupid, okay? Because there are three countries that pretty much rule the world, you could say. The US, Russia, and essentially China. So if your country essentially is not controlled by the US, then most cases is controlled by China. If it's not controlled by China, then it's controlled essentially by Russia. In some cases, France also has a hand in that. So does the UK, and so does essentially Germany, but the UK dropped that scenario. But I think any country that doesn't want to be under the umbrella of the US is stupid, in my opinion. They should choose the US over China and Russia. And if you're thinking to yourself, why should they choose anybody? Why can't the country just be independent? Because we don't live in la la land and we live in the reality. You have to choose one. And regarding Greenland, if the US doesn't take Greenland under its wing, then China and Russia will go after it. The reason why China and Russia will go after Greenland is because China and Russia just lost their hotspot, Venezuela. Iran, China, and Russia lost, essentially, Iran, China, Russia, North Korea lost Venezuela. They lost the oil in Venezuela, they lost the gas in Venezuela, they lost the minerals in Venezuela, they lost a ton of money in Venezuela. So now they're going to go after their next subject. Their next subject is going to be Greenland. They're also losing Iran. Russia and China are losing Iran. It's slipping out of their hands. You know, the entire Iranian regime is about to be replaced, and the Shah is about to be coming in, which is brilliant in my opinion, 100%. I'm Persian myself, as everybody knows. I think it's amazing that, you know, the Iranian regime is collapsing, and the Shah is about to come in. And, you know, America is about to give us a hand as well. And a lot of people think essentially America giving Iran a hand is going to be doomed for Iran. Those people don't really understand history. But putting that to one side, I think the US should go after Greenland because China and Russia are about to go after it because they lost Venezuela and they're angry about that. Mexico and US, I think it's a stupid idea for Mexico to go up against the US. I mean, everybody saw what the US is capable of within 30 minutes. If anybody threatens them, essentially, you know, going after the Venezuelan leader. So I think it's a stupid idea for Mexico to go up against the US. And in general, any country that leaves the US's umbrella is going to go under China or Russia's umbrella. And that doesn't, essentially, that never works out, ever. How will essentially World War III affect the markets? Well, I don't essentially genuinely think World War III is going to be happening. The illusion of World War III will be there, but also World War III is very different to World War I and World War II. World War III is more of an infrastructure attack rather than an actual attack, I would have to say. It's more of a cyber situation, is what's essentially going on right now. So I don't think essentially the scenario that people might think is going to be happening now. Also, regarding the markets, according to some sources, we're already in some sort of World War III scenario, but it's in the scenario of cyber attacks rather than essentially in a scenario of an actual war. Now, there are also, you know, certain wars going on with Ukraine and Russia and essentially in the Middle East. But I mean, you know, a scenario of a World War III where everybody's involved. Everybody's involved in cyber attacks right now. And how it affects the markets is it could play out both ways. One, if countries go into an actual war, they would need money fast. If a country is about to go into war, they need money. And I said this about 2 years ago. About 2 years ago on TikTok Lives, I said if a country needs to essentially, if a country, you know, goes into war, it's actually could play out good for crypto because they need money fast. And the only way to get money fast is through crypto. I'll give you an example. When essentially, you know, Iran was going into war with, you know, Israel, essentially back and forth scenario, Iran is obviously a sanctioned country and they need money quick. So they started essentially going towards cryptocurrencies to make payments happen. Same scenario with Venezuela. Venezuela needed essentially something to avoid sanctions and make money quick. They started using USDT and Bitcoin to avoid essentially sanctions. Russia started using USDT and Bitcoin to avoid sanctions as well. China uses certain cryptocurrencies to avoid sanctions as well, even though they pretend they don't. But war actually would boost certain crypto projects due to essentially money needs to be moving quick. Good day, Miles and CMF. Mike, good to see you. How you doing? But the markets will drop at the beginning of a war. The markets will drop due to shock, because a war has started. The markets will drop due to a shock, a massive shock. But then they will pick up when the liquidity starts flowing in due to the war. Mike, good to see you, bro. And Mike, honestly, thank you so much once again for the $70 donation. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, brother. Let's go, Mike. First, I do not think things will be bleak as communicated, but if it happened, many of you influencers would blame it on someone else. I had to say that every influencer I listen to on the line has an agenda and it hasn't always truth. Miles, following essentially the DC8A law will take into account transactions made from January 2026 onwards or before January 2026. If users have not made any transactions after January, are they still targeted? Technically, no. Regarding the DC8, essentially what we discussed yesterday, if you are somebody essentially who lives in the EU, and other countries are going to be replicating that as well, it's technically states it's for transactions after January 2026, not before it. But again, not financial advice, and rules can change. Morning and evening, Miles and CMF. John, good to see how you're doing. Miles, tell me something good about Adam. It's connected to the XRP ledger through midnight. I think us need to calm down a little bit. Hello, let's go, Scott. Why is the US seemingly held responsible to do anything? Good question. It will be our people, military service members, in harm's way. That is a touchy subject for me. That's a fair, essentially, observation, Scott. Why is the US held responsible to do anything for any country? Because it holds a veto card, which is what I explained yesterday. If you are a country that has a veto card, which means every country can vote for something, and then you could come in and say no, then that means it is your responsibility to essentially make sure things are running smoothly. If the US doesn't want to be in control, then it needs to give up its veto card, which I don't think it should do. I think the US should keep its veto card, and I think the US should be monitoring the world. Because if it doesn't, as I explained, China will take Taiwan, Russia will take essentially Ukraine, and then go after Poland and everybody else, and so on. So the world needs somebody to control it. And again, if you're wondering to yourself, why does the world need anybody to control it, or the US? Because we live in the real world and not la la land. So if the US has a veto card where it could come into a room with all the world leaders, and imagine all the world leaders vote for a certain thing. They say no to this or yes to this. And every country votes for it. The US can come in and say no, and it's vetoed. So if you hold a veto power, that means you are responsible for everything. If you want to be the number one person, if you want to be the number one controller, if you want to have the loudest voice, if you want to have a veto card, then you are responsible for everything that essentially happens around you. If you don't want to be responsible, you have to give up a veto card, which again, I think it shouldn't give up its veto card. And I think the US always should be in control. Not that I think 100% I want the US in control. That's why. If you didn't know, Scott, now you know. That's why they hold the power of a veto card, which means they will dictate what happens. Is it true that the media aren't talking about the riots currently happening in Iran? What do you think will happen next? Will their tyrant leave this time? I hope so. 100%. What's happening in Iran is not good in terms for the people. The regime leaving is an amazing thing, honestly. For 46 years, I'm Iranian myself. For 46 years, my people have been absolutely suppressed by this dictatorship regime, is essentially the Islamic Republic of Iran, by this dictatorship regime. I 100% want them removed. I wanted them removed 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I didn't even want it to happen in the first place. So, and it is true. Certain media channels are not publishing the truth. For example, the BBC. If you didn't know, you're about to find out now. The BBC was actually the BBC was back then, about 45, 46, 47 years ago, the BBC was essentially the one that was printing essentially Ayatollah Khomeini's essentially pictures and sending them to Iran so that the people can use his pictures and protest against the Shah. The BBC had a hand essentially in bringing in this treacherous dictatorship in Iran. Hence why the BBC is the most quietest news channel when the Iranian people stand up. Silent. That's why in Iran, they call BBC Ayatollah, because they don't say anything. The BBC, in fact, was essentially, at that time, there was no Telegram or WhatsApp. The BBC was essentially telling Iranian people where to meet up. The BBC, 47 years ago, was telling the Iranian people where to meet up to go against the Shah, because there was no Telegram, there was no WhatsApp back then. The BBC was telling the Iranian people how to go against the Shah. They were printing pictures of the leader of Iran and saying, use these pictures to go. They were sending tapes of whatever Khomeini essentially recorded to Iran. That's how much of a hand the BBC had inside of it. There are pictures of women essentially in BBC factories printing the Khomeini's picture to ship it to Iran for the people of Iran 47 years ago. So regarding, is the media keeping silent about essentially the Iranian people standing up? Yes, they are. The media is keeping absolute zip tight about it, especially the BBC. The only real news channels essentially reporting on it is France's news channel. Fox News is reporting the truth. That's pretty much it, I'll be honest. The rest of the channels are being very silent about it. And CNN will release something, but they won't still release the truth, and so on. So, and I 100% want them removed. My people have genuinely suffered too much. So, yes, it is true, regarding the news. USA and Israel are peacemakers. I agree. They invade and give, certain wars I might not agree with, but this one, it needs to happen. Is it true that the media is talking about the riots currently happening in Iran? But do you think will happen next? I want them to leave. 100% I want them to leave. And I hope the Shah comes. Good evening. That's the reason. Big shout out to the brave Iranian people. Thank you so much, Joe, for saying that. That's the reason they go to war, so they can print money to improve their currency. Yeah, kind of. Good evening, Miles, and yeah, up to a certain extent. Good evening, Miles and CMF, Bull XRP. Good to see you. How you doing? What day is Iran war with America? Technically never had a war, essentially, on that sense. With all good news that XRP has had over the last year, the price is lower than a year ago. And this sometimes gives me negative, essentially, thoughts. And even after clarity passes, where adoption happen, we finally have a big breakout. Why are you positive that this will happen? Looking for some positive thoughts for the weekend. Good question, John. Regarding essentially XRP and a Clarity Act, according to Ripple themselves, they don't really need a Clarity Act, and XRP has clarity, which is fair enough. But also, Ripple argues the point that they still need a Clarity Act because even though XRP has clarity, institutions and banks don't. So the rules still need to be there for essentially XRP to be able to operate, because the banks will then be operating in gray areas, but XRP essentially has clarity. So it just doesn't work out. There needs to be a Clarity Act. There needs to be, essentially the SEC does this, the CFTC does this, and the banks and the institutions and essentially the governments have a better idea, and there's no more gray areas in general. So yes, essentially, what's been going around, XRP has clarity, 100%. I've said this for the longest time. It's the only token that actually has clarity on paper. But the regulations still need to be there, because even though XRP has clarity, the banks, institutions, and everybody else don't really have that clarity to be able to operate in that essentially market space. And that's essentially what Ripple has said themselves as well, that XRP has clarity, but the banks and institutions still need the regulations to be able to operate properly. Now, also regarding essentially why I think the Clarity Act will pass 100%, in my own point of view, is that it needs to pass. Because if the US is aiming to become the capital of cryptocurrencies, then there needs to be a structural foundation to, for in terms of for the crypto space, for regulations. There needs to be regulations in place if the US is aiming for the capital of cryptocurrencies. And why am I so confident that the US is actually aiming for the capital of cryptocurrencies? Because, for example, the United Kingdom has said 2 years ago that they want to become the capital of cryptocurrencies and the capital of AI technology, but they have done nothing. Now, comparison, the US, Trump comes in, becomes president, I will make America the capital of cryptocurrencies. And we've seen that in action, where left, right, and center cases, crypto cases, were dropped by the SEC. Gary against the left, OCC becomes pro-crypto, FDIC is pro-crypto, CFTC is pro-crypto. They create a pro-crypto program, essentially. Banks essentially are starting to work with crypto companies. The OCC is giving bank charter licensing. So why am I so confident of a Clarity Act or even more regulations for the United States is because, as they always say, actions speak louder than words. And frankly, whatever Trump has said so far has been working out for us inside the crypto space. He said he's aiming for the capital of cryptocurrencies, and we can see that in action. We might not be seeing it extremely fast, but there is a hurdle, and it's called the Democratic Party. And they're trying their best to slow it down. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on tonight's live as well. But I'm 100%, it has to. And regarding essentially a Clarity Act passing, I said essentially this will happen. I said when a Clarity Act passes, whenever it does pass and it's signed essentially by Donald Trump, what's going to be happening is two essentially options. Two outcomes will happen. One, Clarity Act passes, extremely bullish, markets are green, they're going up slightly, and nothing else happens. Markets come back down again within a few days. Everybody's stopped. Everybody's thinking to themselves, hang on a minute, it's the Clarity Act. Why is nothing happening? It's because they want you to essentially have that mentality of nothing's going to happen. And then give it about less than a month, the markets will pick up drastically. And projects that actually have utility purposes will start climbing the ranks. The projects that don't have utility will climb a little bit and slow down. The fuel essentially will run out. Outcome number two, every crypto project goes up. Projects that actually have utility will continue going on the uprise. They will have corrections in between. But those are two outcomes that will play out the moment the Clarity Act is passed. Bullish, a little bit up, nothing else happens. And then suddenly it all happens. Or outcome number two, starts climbing, everything starts climbing a little bit. Projects that have utility actually start climbing. More announcements will be coming out from institutions and banks of more involvements, and essentially projects that have utility will start climbing. Projects that don't will essentially run out of fuel. That's what's going to be happening as well. I didn't know about the BBC's essentially implementations in this country. I learned something. Let's go, Carl. Legacy media, it's barely covered here in Australia as well. Just they are essentially protesting over the real. That's it. Not the truth. I hate legacy media. Thank God for X. Honestly, facts. What Shelley has said. Absolutely thank God for X. A lot of news channels essentially are saying that the Iranian people are protesting because of their currency devaluation. BS. That is not the reason why they're essentially protesting. They're protesting for many reasons, but the number one reason the Iranian people are protesting is because they want the Islamic Republic of Iran out. They want this regime out, this dictatorship out. For 46 years, for 47 years, they have actually dried Iran completely from everything. Water, everything you could possibly think of. They're trying to milk it as much as they can before they leave. And that's the truth. And Fox News will tell you that. CNN struggles to tell you that. So does ABC News. They're all coming out with, oh, it's because of the currency devaluation. It's not because of the currency devaluation. And the BBC just doesn't report anything. I am worried about the card. I do not disagree about your conversations about the card. I have been in combat, and it is easy for folks that never have been there to sit back and say things. So this Fox News only tells the truth. Let's go, Johnny. And Scott, I fully understand where you're coming from as well. It would be great to be able to share at the end of each month new destinations that might be interest some people considering moving abroad. No problem, I could do that. I understand American politics, Miles. I am a member of the PI Sigma Alpha Honor Society of Political Science. That's amazing, Scott. I'm speaking about the theoretic of the US doing more. Of the rhetoric, essentially, the US doing more. Will America grounds essentially invade Iran and then free people? I want my own people to free my own country, to be fairly honest. But, having the US's help would be amazing. 100%. It shows confidence, to the Iranian people. Because when essentially Obama was in power, the Iranian people protested when Obama was in power, and Obama sent hundreds of billions of dollars to the Iranian government when the Iranian people were protesting. That's why I say Obama is an absolute, horrendous president. For somebody to send hundreds of billions of dollars to a country where its people are protesting, and they send that money to the government of that country to silence its own people, and they say Trump is a bad person. That one just, as for Iran, I think we should have already been there to help the people of Iran. Thank you so much, Scott, for saying that. Miles, I hear a big problem in the UK. Is this true? Is essentially what's been suggested for the longest time. I pray and I am sorry for the people of Iran and for my friends and family that are there. Thank you so much, Scott, for that. We know the crypto market is manipulated by whales, 100%, yes. Can you give us your opinion on when crypto prices will fall? Do you think there will be a recovery in mid-January? Yes, I do presume. We're still in quarter one, early quarter one. A lot of things are still supposed to be happening this year, mostly in terms of regulations and moving away from retail to institutional money. And we're getting big announcements coming in from institutions, which we're going to talk about tonight's live as well. And regarding essentially whales manipulating the market space, yes, whales have been doing that for the longest time. Hedge funds have been doing that for the longest time as well. Regarding, can you give us your opinion on when crypto prices will fall? Well, it seems like there's a big, essentially long position open, massive long positions open on Bitcoin, which essentially Bitcoin drops a little bit lower. Those positions will be essentially liquidated, which will cause the price to essentially come down. Miles, what you just said is absolutely true and phenomenal. Jesus Christ, thank you. Let's go, Adi. The first scenario is most likely X may go to $5, then go to 50 cents, the moon to 10K if you believe Brandon Biggs' prophecy. I say again, the Clarity Act has to pass before the midterms, essentially, if the Dems get control of essentially one of the houses of essentially it will slow down to a snail's pace of stop altogether and pro crypto and will be upset. Fair enough, Scott, honest opinion. If the Democrats do get control of anything essentially in terms of crypto policies, we're all absolutely doomed. I'll be honest with you. The Democratic Party should be nowhere near essentially the crypto market space, far as way as possible, because they've done nothing to benefit the American people or the world in terms of crypto. Do you think the Iranian dictator could find refuge in Russia? Yes, by the looks of it. The dictator of Iran is trying to escape to essentially Russia. I hope essentially they are able to get to him before he escapes to Russia, because that man needs to be, well, there are words I can't say on live, but I hope they stick the Iranian flag where the sun don't shine, and essentially, in him. Good evening, Miles, and essentially on the CMF. Let's go, JP. How you doing? They don't have arms to defend themselves, though. So how are they going to overcome the regime when Khomeini has got Iraqi military involved without the US coming in? Which is a fair point, honestly. The Iranian people do need help 100%, and they have cut off the internet as well in Iran. And typically when the Iranian government, the Iranian people have protested 8 times so far. And typically when the Iranian government shuts down the internet, it's a sign that they're going to go on a mass spree. And that's why essentially they shut down the internet, so that no footage can escape out of Iran. Why don't they get rid of, well, they've been trying for the longest time. Good evening, Miles, and on CMF. JP, good to see you, brother. How you doing? Netanyahu said they captured already top officers of Iran and nuclear scientists, and they carry on. He did say that, and Israel has helped the Iranian people a lot. The only reason, if you didn't know, you're about to find out now. The only essentially reason Israel is, backing the Iranian people is because about 2,500 years ago, Cyrus the Great received a letter from the Jewish people. And the letter essentially, in the most simplest way, said that the Jews are being kept as slaves and that they need help and so on. So Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great sent essentially, his entire army to free the Jews, which is exactly what he did. He freed the Jews 2,500 years ago, roughly. And now, Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of essentially Israel, and other members of Israel have said that because of what essentially the Persian Empire did then, because of what Cyrus the Great did, this is essentially an act to free the Iranian people. The same way Cyrus the Great freed the Jews is the same way Israel wants to, reciprocate that and free the Iranian people. The earth produces and recycles everything we need. Clarity Act. Facts. When did the Iranian regime can fall? When do I think the Iranian regime can fall? I personally think it's on the edge of falling, which is amazing that the Iranian government is about to be falling. And it's true, Israel's promised 3,009 years ago. I don't know about that one. Do you think that the Bank of International Settlements will make XRP Tier 1 soon after the Clarity Act? I mean, out of all the blockchains, the only blockchain that's on the PDF document for the Bank of International Settlements is Ripple. Ripple is the only essentially blockchain company on the list of the in the PDF documentation from the Bank of International Settlements for cross-border payments, and it's alongside SWIFT, which is exactly about the same time SWIFT decided to take blockchain seriously. Ironically, Miles, it may have been disclosed, I may have missed it. Is there something we can do as a group for the folks in Iran? If so, how can we make sure the people on the ground get help? Spread, essentially spread what you see on X, regarding Iranian people. If you really want to help, essentially, is the only thing you can do is whenever you want, when you go on social media, spread the word if you can. Essentially, just retweet a content you may see somebody posting of what's happening in Iran, because the news isn't doing it. They're just keeping silent about it. The news is defending the Iranian government rather than essentially coming out and saying the only two people or three people that are essentially, coming out is Trump, Mark Rubio, and Benjamin Netanyahu. These are the only three people that are coming out and standing for the Iranian people. Everybody else, silent. They're supporting the Iranian government. Everybody else is supporting the Iranian government. But these three or two people are the only ones that are coming out. Now, but then again, that's up to you if you want to post it or essentially, like the content and so on. Completely up to you guys. Send in the SF form, the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. Let's go, Scott. Now, crypto delegations. Golden Age insights from essentially TD Cohen. A TD Cohen essentially report calls the current period right now the golden age for crypto delegations under President Trump's administration, emphasizing potential regulatory alignments in the US markets. This report essentially suggests significant impacts on tokenization and crypto integration, forecasting potential changes that could reshape financial markets and major cryptocurrencies. TD Cowen's report categorizes the current climate as the golden age of crypto, indicating potential shifts in policy direction. The analysis grounded in essentially political appointments, suggesting increasing acceptance of digital assets in the US economy. Current US President Donald Trump, according to reports, may influence these changes by appointing officials with pro-essentially crypto leanings, and regulatory leaders like essentially Paul S.K. Atkins aim to essentially implement policies supporting crypto adoption under his administration. This regulatory shift could also significantly impact the crypto markets, encouraging essentially tokenization efforts and growth. The measures might also attract institutional capital and foster technological essentially integrations across traditional finance regimes as well. The financial implications also include potential growth in digital asset custody services and the development essentially of crypto-friendly regulations. Changes might also enhance US market competitiveness globally, providing essentially a more comprehensive framework for digital assets. Stakeholders also essentially should expect evolving policies with impact on innovation, particularly essentially in tokenized securities and payment infrastructures. Adjustments to regulatory frameworks will play a crucial role potentially in terms of the US, in terms of the crypto sector. So, TD Cowen essentially coming out today and saying that we are in the golden age of crypto. And again, this is essentially a reconfirmation of the majority of other CEOs out there as well that have come forward essentially and said the exact same things, which is essentially that we are going to be seeing that change happen in terms of the United States, in terms of crypto regulations. We're going to be seeing the institutions coming in. We're going to be seeing the banks coming in, and we're going to be seeing even more governments getting on board outside the US as well, because the US does lead by example, and everybody else essentially follows in suit. And TD Cowen essentially coming out, saying golden age of crypto is just another reconfirmation on that matter. Now, also, what we're going to talk about next on tonight's live is regarding the number one question, the Clarity Act, which is essentially on everybody's topic. Number one topic for when you're inside the crypto space. The US bill addresses insider. Oh, sorry. Before we talk about the Clarity Act, let's just talk about this for a second. The US bill addresses insider trading in prediction markets. So about a few nights ago, we were talking about on this live regarding Polymarket, and I was sharing with you information on Polymarket, how it's actually, if you don't even use Polymarket for the bettings that they do, it still gives you essentially, I presume it as data, because when it comes to trading, essentially, you want to see where the market is headed. There's a lot of psychological factors in play as well of what the majority is thinking. If people are putting real money down and betting where they think things are going to be going, essentially in everything that you can do on Polymarket, it gives you that perspective of what the majority is thinking, because they're putting real money down. They're not voting yes and no, because anybody can do that, and it wouldn't be used as some sort of profound data. But when you're putting your own hard-earned cash down and betting for something to happen, it gives you an idea of what the majority is thinking, or the essentially minority is thinking. So why am I bringing this up? Because the Democratic Party hate Polymarket. Rep. essentially Richie Torres introduced the 2026 bill to ban federal officials from trading on prediction markets using insider knowledge following Associate Maduro's removal, market and controversy involving crypto platform Polymarket. The move highlights escalating US regulatory risk for crypto-based prediction markets, prompting potential shifts in DeFi engagements and legal frameworks governing essentially insider trading. New legislations aim to curb insiders and prediction platforms. US Representative essentially Richie Torres has introduced the Public Integrity essentially in Financial Prediction Markets Act of 2026, aiming to prevent federal officials from exploiting insider knowledge on prediction markets like Polymarket. This follows a controversial market relating to essentially Nicolas Maduro's status, when somebody essentially put $33,000 down as a bet that the essentially leader and the dictator essentially of Venezuela will be arrested. And it turned out to be right, and he got paid out $400,000. Now, the Democratic Party is coming out and saying that we believe that this was essentially a member in Congress or a member of the Senate or a politician in general, and that this needs to be banned, and that essentially, politicians should be nowhere near the prediction markets like Polymarket, for example. You know what I love about the Democratic Party? And you might be surprised me saying those words, that the hypocrisy is just laughable. Because 30 Democrats, 30 Democrats have band together to come up with a bill to ban politicians from Polymarket because of insider trading, because one guy turned $33,000 into $400,000 because of one guy. Nancy Pelosi, her portfolio, as I've said many times, beats hedge funds. That is okay for the Democratic Party. We don't hear about 30 Democrats coming out saying, you know, because of insider trading, because you're a politician, you should stay away from the stock market. That we don't hear. But one guy on Polymarket turns $33,000 into $400,000, all hell breaks loose. 30 Democrats came out, band together to ban politicians from Polymarket or any other essentially betting websites like Polymarket. But Nancy Pelosi or any other Democrat out there, like Pocahontas, for example, where their portfolios and their wages just don't add up. And we're supposed to, take that as Nancy Pelosi is just an intelligent person. She's just very good when it comes to analytics and psychology and anything else that comes with, trading on the stock market. We just have to, take that as essentially face value. Not that she's been receiving essentially inside information, because no, that would be wrong. They don't do that. The Democratic Party always essentially amazes me, genuinely. The Democratic Party always amazes me of how much they waste their own time and the American people's time. Most importantly, their money. I'm just, genuinely amazed because they don't pass regulations for the crypto space. They haven't done anything positive, to be fairly honest. Trump essentially goes after a dictator and removes him from Venezuela. The Democratic Party go against Trump. Trump removes illegals coming into the country. The Democratic Party goes against Trump. Trump wants to keep America safe from criminals on the streets and clean up the streets. The Democratic Party doesn't want them in their states. Has the Democratic Party done anything to benefit the American people? Keeping crypto even out of it. Have they done anything to keep the essentially American people safe? Ever? Because everything Trump has done so far, which is keep Americans safe, streets clean, keep criminals out of America, get rid of dictators, for some reason, all of that is seen as bad by the Democratic Party. And now 30 Democrats banding together because this is a very important issue. Removing dictators, not so much. Keeping American people safe, not so much. Keeping criminals out of America, not so much. Sending news reporters to go to Venezuela, essentially sending news reporters to go to El Salvador to bring a criminal back into the US, that they care about. It just honestly amazes me. Like, what goes on in a Democrat's mindset? Just what happens inside of it? Because, the saying that I say, it's like a goldfish. They have goldfish essentially for brain cells. If I say that, I'm insulting the goldfish. Honestly, brains for goldfish, I'm insulting the goldfish when I say that for the Democratic Party. It genuinely amazes me with the Democratic Party. One guy, $33,000, $400,000. All hell breaks loose. Now, moving on essentially from the stupidity of the Democratic Party, as usual, to the EU. The EU backs historical trade deal with Mercosur essentially block after 25 years of talks. This is a big deal because the European Party, or the European essentially Parliament, has decided to shift away from China. So, Remember when I said essentially China is essentially Russia are never going to be in control? They just don't have what it takes, but the US does. And well, we're getting more signs of that today. The European Union countries backed a massive trade agreement with South American nations, ending more than 25 years of talks and months of difficult negotiations to get enough countries on board. The deal essentially with Mercosur, essentially a group that includes Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, marks the largest free trade agreement the EU has ever pursued. At least 15 countries, representing 65% of the bloc's population, voted in favor, meeting the threshold needed for approval according to EU sources and diplomats. With Donald Trump's ready to reshape global trade, the European Commission and countries like Germany and Spain say the agreement will help make essentially up for the business losses from US tariffs. They essentially also argue it will reduce dependency on China. Do you see how the EU is not saying essentially we're going to reduce our dependency essentially on the US, but they're essentially reducing the dependency on China by partnering up with Latin American countries. At the exact same time, Trump is cleaning up Latin America by getting rid of dictators and certain, C members. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, Pablo Escobar members. So, with Donald Trump essentially ready to reshape global trades with European Commissions, on that note, France, Europe, essentially the EU's biggest architectural producer, voted against the deal. I'm not shocked about that one. The country says essentially the agreement will increase imports of cheaper food products like beef, essentially poultry and sugar, hurting domestic farmers. Austria, Hungary, essentially Ireland, and Poland also voted no, while Belgium did not take a position. An EU diplomat and Poland's essentially agriculture minister said 21 countries supported the agreement. Farmers have taken out essentially onto the streets across the EU in protest. They blocked highways in France and Belgium and marched in Poland. German essentially Chancellor Frederick called essentially Friday's vote a milestone and said the deal will benefit Germany and Europe. But 25 years of negotiations is too long. It's vital that the next free trade agreements are concluded swiftly, he said in a statement. EU member essentially states have until 5 p.m. Brussels time to submit written confirmations of their vote. This will allow Commission President Ursula essentially to sign the agreement with Mercosur and partners in that perspective as well. The European Commission finished negotiations essentially on the deal a year ago. The European Parliament will also need to approve the accord before it takes effect. The free trade agreement would be EU's biggest in terms of tariff cuts, eliminating 4 billion euros, which is according to dollars, 4.66 billion dollars of duties on exports. Mercosur countries also essentially currently charge of high tariffs, including 35% on car parts, 28% of dairy products, and 27% on wines. The EU essentially hoped to expand goods trades worth essentially 111 billion euros in 2024. EU exports mainly consist of machinery, chemicals, and transport equipment, while the other countries will be feeding essentially the European countries with products in terms of minerals, pulp, and essentially paper and agriculture. To win over skeptics, the European Commission put in place safeguards that can stop imports of sensitive farm products. It has strengthened import controls, particularly for pesticides, and residents created a crisis fund, sped up support for farmers, and promised to reduce import duties on fertilizers. So it seems like Trump essentially cleaning up South America, because South American people are amazing people, and they also needed help because certain South American countries are run by dictators, and one of them has been removed, a couple more to go. But it seems like Trump cleaning up South America, there was a reason for it, because the EU, after 25 years, essentially has opened up negotiations and also did a deal with South American countries to start working together. After 25 years, there was a reason why Trump was essentially cleaning up South America. There's many reasons why they were cleaning up South America. Some of them essentially for the purposes of regarding keeping American borders safe as well, but also regarding essentially the deals that are being essentially made for essentially the US and the EU, and that the EU doesn't need to rely on China anymore because they're actually reducing the dependency on China. Now, this one you're all going to love. Senate Republicans race towards a crypto vote on bill with uncertainty Democratic buy-in. So I talked about this 2 days ago as well, regarding essentially Democratic Party not coming to the table for the crypto space. But they will come towards the table for bringing essentially criminals back into the US, the Democratic Party, but not so much when it comes to bringing innovation and creating jobs in the US. That's they're against the Democratic Party, and they're completely against that. So Senate Democrats haven't fled the negotiation tables for the legislations to finally regulate the US crypto industry, but frustration are evident as new draft essentially is being sped up, written essentially as the weekend approaches. The Senate Banking Committee has assured the industry it will get its markup next week, which requires essentially that an official notice goes out by Friday night. Its partner essentially on the bill, the Senate Agriculture Committee, has reportedly been trying to get on the same schedule for a committee vote, though it's uncertain whether the top Democrat negotiator on the panel is ready. Regarding the Banking essentially Committee and essentially Senate Agriculture Committee, everybody is on board. All the Republicans are on board to pass crypto regulations going forward. The Democratic person on the panel, not so much. So the Republicans are getting fed up and angry. For essentially his part, Senator Tim Scott, the chairman of the banking panel, has signaled that he's going forward, ready or not. A session in which lawmakers can discuss amendments before deciding whether to advance the bill to overall Senate is happening essentially on the 15th of January. Senator Tim Scott, chairman of the banking committee, said, "I can't take it anymore." Regarding that matter, they're moving forward. If the Democrats want to act like adults and sit at the table and discuss crypto regulations, by all means, they're welcome. And if they don't and want to act like children, then the Republican Party doesn't care anymore. They're moving forward with the crypto bills. A session in which essentially lawmakers can discuss amendments before deciding whether to essentially advance the bill to the overall Senate. But he'll need an actual bill to work on before next week gets underway. So staff essentially has been churning out the language. Top Republican negotiators, Senator Cynthia Luminous, teased the process on Friday, essentially today, by posting a picture of what appears to be the first page of the working draft of the Responsible Financial Innovation Act. Her post, which said essentially she has some reading to do, suggests that the draft language may be coming together. People familiar with the negotiations have said that the resistance senator, essentially Cory Booker, the New Jersey essentially Democrat who has led his party in Agriculture Committee talks with Republican Chairman essentially John Boozman, could end up delaying the panel from next week's plan. A Booker essentially aide referred to CoinDesk to Boozman's office on the timing of the markup. Chairman essentially Boozman remains committed to advancing a baptism bill, and good faith discussions are continuing, a spokesperson essentially for the committee told CoinDesk in a statement. For the Senate to ultimately approve a bill that President Donald Trump can sign into law, the advocates essentially need to keep 7 Democrats on board. Though the legislative talks have stretched essentially back for months, some of the Democrats' central requests hadn't yet been addressed, including that the bill will block senior government officials from profiting off the crypto sector, most notably a heavily crypto-involved Trump. One of the leading Democratic lawmakers in the talk, Senator Rubin, told essentially Punchbowl that essentially this demand represents a red line, meaning it must be satisfied if he's going to support the end product. They need to get the rights. Essentially, they're not going to have enough votes to pass this thing. Though essentially tensions may be high between the parties, the fact essentially that they sustain baptism talks to write legislation is an unusual mark of essentially wide congressional support for doing essentially something about crypto. Crypto insiders remain impressed at the seriousness of Democrats who stayed at the table, despite the resistance from others in the party to work on digital asset regulations. It's important for folks to realize that the Democrats have been putting so much time and effort into this, said Talia, the vice president for the government's relations at the DeFi Education Fund, in an interview with CoinDesk. If the two committees pass related crypto market structure bills, the legislation would be combined for an overall Senate vote. that bill would be expected essentially to easily clear the House of Representatives and become law, but the Senate's essentially Democratic support remains in question. Apart from the talks between Democrats and Republicans, the crypto industry has been battling it out essentially with traditional finance and lobbyists who have essentially pushed back on such things as stablecoins yields and decentralized finance and protections. So the pending draft from the Banking Committee could answer a lot of questions and potentially disappointment players who are unnecessary essentially for the final passage. So the Democratic Party essentially absolutely taking the piss as usual. Some Democrats are essentially acting like adults and they're sitting at the table and are ready for negotiations with the Republican Party for the crypto structure bill. And according to the chairman of the Banking Committee, he is absolutely frustrated at the majority of the Democratic Party for not showing up. And he said it's becoming a type of bill where it's ready or not. In other words, in the simplest way to put it, we can't wait any more longer for you morons to get to the table. So either you sit at the table and we have a discussion, or I couldn't care less what you have to say when the bill is passed. I could have worded that much more foul, but I didn't want it to. Now, moving on from that to BNY Mellon. BNY Mellon essentially unveils tokenized deposit features for institutions. If you haven't heard about it, if you have heard about it, you're about to know about it now. BNY Mellon has introduced tokenized deposit capabilities on its digital asset platform for institutional clients, offering essentially on-chain representations of deposit balances for uses in collateral, margin, and payments, aligning with evolving financial ecosystems. BNY Mellon coming towards the table is incredible. Last year, we talked about BNY Mellon essentially going to be introducing certain services for the crypto space in 2026, essentially, and we're starting to hear about these services now. BNY Mellon's launch of tokenized deposits signifies an important advancement in integrating traditional and digital finance, driving quicker, essentially more efficient financial transactions for institutional clients. The Bank of New York, essentially, Mellon has essentially made significant strides by launching tokenized deposits and capabilities on digital asset platforms. This strict move essentially enables on-chain representation of client deposits and balances for use in collateral and payments. Institutional partners include notable names like ICE, Galaxy, and WisdomTree. The implementation of this initiative aims to offer institutional clients greater speed and efficiency in financial essential transactions, anchored in trust-based regulatory frameworks. By incorporating on-chain deposits and representations, BNY is set to revolutionize financial operations across collateral, payments, and liquidity management. When major behemoths like BNY Mellon comes towards the crypto tables and essentially introduces services, it essentially shows confidence, major confidence towards the crypto space, not just for other institutions in the US, but on a worldwide basis. Innovation reflects BNY's essentially role in enhancing institutional finance towards greater on-chain liquidity and efficiency. And according to essentially the Chief Product and Innovation Officer at BNY, as institutional markets move towards always and opening essentially models, BNY is committed to essentially innovating and helping define how cash moves across the modern financial systems. And tokenized deposits provide us with the opportunity to extend our trusted banking deposits into essentially digital rails, enabling clients to operate with greater speed across collateral, margin, and payments, within a framework built for scale, resilience, and regulatory alignments. The introduction of tokenized essentially deposits by BNY Mellon sets a new precedent in financial innovation, allowing real-time efficient settlement workflows. And let's not forget, essentially, BNY Mellon is the custodian platform for Ripple as well, and apparently Ripple's essentially Ripple Prime, is also a part of it. And on the topic of Ripple, if you have heard about it, if you haven't heard about it, you're about to hear about it now. Ripple wins a UK regulatory approval from essentially Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA. So this is when I said we're going to come back to the FCA in the UK and Ripple. Ripple, a cross-border payments network using blockchain and cryptocurrencies, won regulatory approval in the UK, allowing it to carry out certain crypto-related activities in the country. The company's UK subsidiary Ripple Markets UK Ltd secured registration with the FCA under the country's money laundering essentially regulations, according to an update to the regulator's registry today. Ripple has received approval for its electronic money institution EMI license and crypto asset registration from the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. That is an incredible announcement coming out of the UK. Honestly, these approvals allow Ripple to expand its payment platform in the UK, enabling local institutions to send cross-border payments using digital assets. This moves further essentially solidifies Ripple's position within the UK's financial ecosystem. As I said previously, Washington, D.C., capital of politics, City of London, capital of money, and Ripple just got a license in the UK to be able to transact. This is also what I say, essentially, what I've been saying for the longest time. Ripple can take footsteps inside the financial sector to expand the XRP ledger. Other blockchain projects are foundations and developers, which means they can't apply for licensings. They have to be tested and used, and at the end be chosen for something. Whereas Ripple doesn't have to sit back and wait for institutions and banks and governments to start using the XRP ledger and see if they like it. No, they can take footsteps to expand the XRP ledger because it's a private company. They can acquire licensings, acquire businesses, turn into a bank. This is why I always say, honestly, Ripple, XRP ledger here, everybody else here when it comes to the financial sector in terms of other blockchain projects. Ripple Payments is an end-to-end solution designed for cross-border transactions, managing the flow of funds. On behalf of businesses, it connects UK institutions with Ripple's global payout partners, facilitating fast and reliable payments across borders. The platform eliminates the need for businesses to manage the complexities of blockchain infrastructure. By utilizing Ripple's fully licensed platform, businesses can offer digital payment services quickly without essentially bearing the infrastructure burden. The solution ensures compliance also essentially with regulatory standards while simplifying cross-border transactions for companies. Ripple's payment platform is designed to be transparent, secure, ensuring that digital asset transactions meet industry requirements. Monica Long, president essentially at Ripple, noted blockchain and digital assets are becoming integral to the global economy. The approval marks a step forward for Ripple's ambitions to integrate these technologies into the mainstream financial systems. The UK's regulatory environment supports Ripple's efforts in expanding its services within the region. Ripple's approval by the FCA marks a significant step in its ongoing investment in the UK market. Ripple has essentially maintained its largest office outside the US and London since 2016, contributing to the local blockchain and financial technology ecosystem. The company has continued to essentially its workforce in the UK and support local developers and blockchain startups. Ripple has also committed over £5 million to UK universities through its University Blockchain Essential Initiative, UBRI. This initiative encourages research and development within the blockchain space. And according to Cassie, the managing essentially director of UK and Europe at Ripple, securing approvals from the FCA allows us to provide digital asset infrastructure to UK businesses. Ripple's expanding operations are in line with the company's long-term commitments to supporting UK's financial sector. It's massive. And I bet you're wondering why the price of XRP hasn't moved. Because this is just the announcement. The action is after. In other words, they just got approved. Wait for it to mature, you would see price action. But that is a huge announcement. And another reason why Ripple, XRP Ledger, XRP, RLUSD will always be above other blockchain projects when it comes to the financial sector. Ripple can do things other blockchains cannot. On that note, we have reached the endings of tonight's live as well. If you're watching this for the first time ever, this was the CMF Live Show, stands for Crypto Miles Family. My name is Miles. You can tune to this live Monday, Friday, 10 p.m. London time onwards for the most recent news regarding cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, AI, politics, and regulations. Pretty much vital information for you to know about regarding the world complete transforming to digital space. Before we do go, obviously, let's go start a comment section. Also, the disclaimer of this live show, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. This was episode 429 of the CMF Live Show. Honestly, thank you so much to everybody from the CMF or anybody else out there who liked and retweeted essentially this live show. And I also hope you all have an amazing weekend. But again, before we go, let's go inside the comment section first. Let's see what's happening there. And then we'll call it a night. Let's see where we were at. I don't trust international organizations. Do they have food or other essentials? No. What part of I will start to spread the news when I see it? Thank you so much, Scott, for that. And thank you so much to anybody else, essentially from the CMF that, if you do come across any sort of news from the Iranian people themselves on X or so on, and you decide to retweet it or like it, thank you so much, because the news isn't doing it. What part of devaluing the current fiat system do people not understand? It's done. It's over. Time for transparency. Why would they do that? What part? Regarding the EU, essentially, partnering with South America, is because they want to, reduce that dependency on China, which will put a lot of pressure on China, by the way. Golden, kind of hard to create jobs in the US when Democrats only want to create fraudulent jobs within the government. 100% I agree with that. Goldfish is a good luck sign. Those not going to be suitable for Democrats. Elena Terrett said essentially March at the earliest. I hope they can agree quickly, and there's not too much pushback from the Dems. I 100%, I agree with Shelley. I hope so too, regarding that matter as well. Thanks, Miles, and great weekend, Scott. Have a great weekend, brother, and see you next week. Another great, essentially, program tonight. Congratulations, episode 429. Thank you so much, Scott, for the kind words, brother. See you next week as well. Have a great weekend. Good day, Miles. Good night, Miles and CMF. Mike, thank you so much, brother, for the donation. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for that, Mike. And I'll see you next week, and have a great weekend as well, brother. Fantastic, fantastic live, Miles. Thank you. Good night, Miles and CMF. Jason, see you Monday, same time as usual as well. Have a great weekend. Thanks for the update, Miles. Much appreciated. Have a great weekend, CMF. Let's go. Shelly, see you next week as well. Have a great weekend as well. Have a great weekend. Let's go. Mike, you too, brother. Thanks for this amazing live show. I sent you a message on Telegram. But you haven't read it yet, let me know when you are free. It's about my crypto asset. Yes, Carl, I'll definitely check it out after this live. I'm so sorry about that. Miles, thank you so much, mate. You are unbelievable. Adi, thank you so much for the kind words, and have a great weekend. I'll see you next week as well. By the way, everyone, like, comment, retweet, follow, subscribe. If you already haven't, if you have, thank you so much to all of you. Night, Miles and CMF. Thanks for a great live. XRP forever. Let's go, John. See you next week as well. Have a great weekend. Share the live. Share the news about Iran. Let's get that out of the world. Let's go, Scott. This is powerful. UK license XRP for institutional payments. Good night, Miles. Let's go, Cali. Have a great weekend as well. And it is absolutely amazing news. And see you next week as well. Good night, Miles. See you Monday night. Let's go, Funky. See you Monday night, brother. Same time as usual. Have a great weekend as well. CMF, have a great weekend. Let's share any and all news on Iran. We have to help the people of Iran. Let's go, Scott. Thank you so much for that, brother. Thank you so much, Miles and CMF. Have a great night. I'll see you on Monday. Carl, see you on Monday. Same time as usual. Have a great weekend as well. Share the live. Outstanding program. Let's go, Scott. Thanks so much, brother. Night, Miles and CMF. Have a great weekend. Let's go, Joe. Have a great weekend as well. Thanks, Miles. Good night, all. Let's go, Stormy. Have a great weekend as well. I will see everybody Monday, 10 p.m. London time onwards for the next episode of CMF Live. For episode 430. Was the big news for the 9th? Yes, it was. But it came out today. See you Monday, same time as usual. Everybody have an amazing weekend. Like, follow, comment, subscribe if you already haven't. And Mike, once again, thank you so much, brother, for the donation as well. Absolutely amazing. See you every Monday, same time as usual, 10 p.m. London time onwards. Have a great weekend, CMF members, and see you next week. Love you all.